In a small daycare in Israel, administrators had a problem. Parents kept picking up their kids late. So the daycare introduced what they thought was a logical solution. But late pickups more than doubled. In 1966, a Romanian dictator banned contraception. He just wanted a bigger workforce. 23 years later, that one piece of paper didn't just grow the population, it could have created the fuel needed for a bloody revolution that ended the dictator's life. And 65 million years ago, a single butterfly could be the only reason you and I are here now. What do daycares, revolutions, butterflies, and even cobras have in common? Almost nothing. Except they all follow the same pattern. Invisible at first, small decisions, counterintuitive consequences, effects that didn't show up until years, sometimes decades later. And a lot of what felt random at first wasn't random at all. We like to think we understand how the world works. Something happens and our brain rushes to explain it, builds a clean, simple story. More police equals less crime, work harder, get better results. Experts know what they are doing. And the stories feel right. Not always because they are true, because they make sense.
When people look at the world or at any problem in the world, you have the sense, every one of us has the sense, that we see the world the way we do because that's the way it is. So we have the sense that we're in touch with reality.
We are pattern-seeking machines. We don't like randomness. We fill the gaps. We connect the dots that were never connected, turn guesses into beliefs, and over time, those beliefs harden into something dangerous. Common sense. In the 1990s, violent crime in America collapsed. It was rather unexpected, but the moment it happened, everybody had an explanation. More police on the streets, better law enforcement strategies, tougher sentencing laws. Each one felt reasonable. Each one was stated with total confidence. But almost all of them couldn't hold under scrutiny. Criminologists, economists, politicians, all looking at the same event, all explaining it with stories that felt true to them. Not because they were proven, because they were repeated until they felt obvious. That's conventional wisdom, common sense, but that's not necessarily knowledge. It could be just the illusion of understanding. A story we tell ourselves so we never have to look underneath. The actual cause of the crime reduction had nothing to do with policing. Nothing to do with the economy. It was set in motion 20 years earlier by a decision nobody connected to crime at all. We'll get to that later, but right now we are all running our lives on the conventional wisdom autopilot. Want to lose weight? Just eat less. Want to succeed? Just work harder. Or just be yourself, whatever that means. But when was the last time you actually questioned any of these suggestions? You see, the most dangerous thing about conventional wisdom or common sense isn't that they are wrong. It's that they are repeated so many times and feel so right, we never stop to question anything we hear anymore. What actually drives our behavior? Values, character, intentions? Yes, but more often than we want to admit, something else is running the show. Incentives. The hidden currency beneath every decision. Every shortcut, every seemingly irrational behavior makes perfect sense the moment you understand what someone was actually being rewarded for. I'm sure you know that people don't always do what you tell them to do, unless the incentives are right. The thing with incentives, it's a double-edged sword.
I want to be very clear in saying that I have nothing wrong with incentives. I'm not saying that all incentives are bad. What I'm talking about is the fact that some incentives that are very well-intentioned have very adverse effects.
About 30 years ago, the Chicago public school system introduced high-stakes standardized testing. Teachers whose students scored well on that test kept their jobs, earned bonuses, got recognition. But teachers whose students scored poorly didn't get any of that. Then economists analyzed the test results. Certain classrooms were showing suspicious improvements. Not gradual progress, sudden jumps, followed by no improvement or even full reversals the very next year. The data pointed to one conclusion: some teachers were interfering with their students' scores. Not because they were bad people, I have a lot of respect for the profession, but good people with wrong incentives, and incentives go deeper than money. Many incentives are financial, yes, but some are moral, some are social, and these incentives can shift and even compete with each other. Those daycare centers in Israel I mentioned earlier, parents were picking up their kids late, so the centers introduced a small fine. Just a few dollars for a late pickup, and late pickups more than doubled. Because the moment a price was attached, the guilt disappeared. Before the fine, parents felt bad keeping a teacher waiting. That guilt was doing real work, invisible but powerful. It was a moral incentive to come on time. But the daycares turned a moral transaction into a financial one.
Think about the following intuition. How bad would you feel about taking a pencil from work home compared to how bad would you feel about taking 10 cents from a petty cash box? These things feel very differently. Would being a step removed from cash for a few seconds by being paid by token make a difference? Our subjects doubled their cheating.
Now, lateness had a tangible and a very manageable price tag. And for a lot of parents, a few dollars was a price worth paying. The fine didn't just fail to solve the problem, it destroyed the mechanism that was already working. And when the centers removed the fine, late pickups never went back down. The moral incentive was already destroyed, and now there was no financial incentive either. With incentives, you can't always put back what's been broken, and the daycare story isn't unique. In colonial India, the British government was dealing with a cobra problem. So they offered a cash bounty for every dead cobra brought in. But locals quickly realized it was easier to breed cobras, kill them, and collect the bounty than hunt them in the wild. When the government canceled the program, cobra breeders released their now worthless cobras into the streets. The cobra population ended up larger than before the bounty existed. Nobody was intentionally trying to cause a problem, they were just rational people responding to the incentives in front of them. Competing incentives aren't a flaw in the system, it's the default state. Think back to when you were a teenager. You probably told your parents you were sleeping at a friend's house, but were you? I was at a party. I wasn't a bad kid, but lying was just the rational choice. I wanted to go, they would have said no, so I lied. The incentive to go to that party was just stronger than the disincentive of not telling the truth. I didn't feel good about it, I still don't, but my parents probably did the exact same thing to their parents, and probably felt bad about it too. It's not a generational problem, it's a problem of incentives.
Professionally, is people telling me incentives don't work. They do work. What you tried didn't work, which is fine, or maybe they work in a way that we don't understand, but the incentives do work.
Take real estate agents. When you hire one to sell your home, the assumption is that your interests are aligned. You both want the highest price, right? But researchers found that agents selling their own homes leave them on the market on average of 10 days longer and sell them for significantly more than their clients' homes.
The point is that realtors are people and people respond to incentives, and that's the way it is. And the argument we made in our first book was that the commission structure as commissioned, as set up for realtors doesn't work in the best interest of their clients often.
The difference between selling your home for $300,000 versus $290,000 is $10,000 to you. But to your agent, that same gap is about $150 in extra commission. Your agent's incentive is speed. Yours is value. Those are not the same goals. Or your insurance broker has an incentive to recommend products that pay higher commission. Your lawyer billing hourly has no financial reason to resolve anything fast. Some doctors have financial relationships with the drug companies whose products they prescribe. None of these people are necessarily dishonest. Their interests and yours are just pointing in different directions. And if you own a business, the same thing is happening inside your own team right now. You most likely already have several competing incentives running in parallel, but you built those incentives. Maybe not on purpose, but they exist. Incentives are like hidden rules of the game. And when they backfire, it's not because you hired the wrong people. It's because you hired smart people who understood the rules of the game you created and just figured out how to win. How much of what you believe have you actually questioned? Maybe you read it somewhere, heard it at a conference, but did you verify it yourself? Because most of what we call knowledge isn't really knowledge. It's just stuff people repeat to each other. If something is repeated so many times, but so many confident people, questioning it doesn't feel right at all. But for example, have you seen Scarface, or Narcos, or any of those drug lord shows? At some point, the drug lord became almost a cultural icon. Mansions, tigers, submarines, gold. But when economists got access to the real financial records of a Chicago street gang, the math told a different story. The average street-level drug dealer earned less than minimum wage. Many lived with their mothers and yet had a roughly 1 in 4 chance of being killed over a 4-year period. The risk and reward were way off. But we built our entire impression of that world around the people at the very top. Same thing happens everywhere else. We see a young entrepreneur on the Forbes cover, but we don't see the hundreds who tried the exact same thing and failed. We read about open plan offices at Google and assume that's the right way to design a workspace. But a lot of research shows the opposite. People actually collaborate less in open spaces. We assume our best salespeople make the best sales managers, but selling and leading a team are completely different skills. Imagine you travel back 65 million years to the age of dinosaurs, and while you're there, you accidentally step on a butterfly. One small accident, completely unintentional, but when you come back, the world looks different. That one butterfly set off a chain of consequences so small that nothing in the next 65 million years would look obviously wrong. But every small change was compounding, always compounding. The insect that the butterfly would have eaten survives instead, that insect's population shifts slightly, the bird that fed on those insects finds a little more food, the bird's migration pattern changes barely noticeably. A seed that bird would have carried ends up somewhere else, a different forest grows, a different ecosystem emerges. Over 1,000 years, almost invisible. Over 1 million, maybe a little more noticeable, but over 65 million years, you and I may no longer exist. Not because of some massive asteroid, because of one small butterfly that was stepped on 65 million years ago.
Now,
what chaos theory tells us, and this is something that usually applies to the world of hard science rather than social science and our own lives, but what chaos theory tells us is that there is what's called sensitivity to initial conditions. Fancy way of saying that if any small change happens, that over time it can lead to very big effects.
And that is the butterfly effect. But it doesn't just apply to thought experiments. Every civilization that ever rose or fell was set in motion by decisions where consequences wouldn't show up for generations. Every life, including yours and mine, required an almost incomprehensible chain of events to line up just right. Which brings us back to crime drop in America. As I said, violent crime collapsed in the 1990s. A room full of experts all had explanations, but they couldn't all agree. Then two people started pulling on threads. Those two people were Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner, an economist and a journalist. They weren't looking for one specific answer. They were looking at everything that had changed in the decades before. And then they made a controversial discovery that later became the centerpiece of their book, Freakonomics. Buried in the data, they found something unexpected. In 1973, the US Supreme Court legalized abortion nationwide, a decision known as Roe versus Wade. Over the following 2 decades, fewer children were being born. Allegedly, the children who'd be born into poverty, instability, and a lack of opportunity. Roughly 20 years later, those children would have been in their late teens and early 20s, the age when crime rates peak. But those children weren't there. And at the same time, crime fell across the board. The cause and the effect were separated by an entire generation. Nobody planned it, nobody predicted it, nobody connected the dots until Levitt and Dubner stumbled onto it looking for something else entirely. Maybe you're thinking that's just one data point. One country, one policy could be a coincidence. And you're right, it could be. Except, in 1966, Nicolae Ceausescu did the opposite. He banned contraception and abortion across Romania. More children, more people, stronger state. At least that was the plan. And births did increase, but many of those children were born unwanted, left into state orphanages which were overwhelmed by the sudden surge. And that generation grew up all at once. In 1989, 23 years later, Romania exploded into a bloody revolution that ended Ceausescu's life. Two countries, two polar opposite policies. Same gap between cause and effect. I'm not arguing whether any of these policies were right or wrong. These are complex, personal, and politically charged questions. What we are looking at is the butterfly effect operating at the scale of entire societies. But the same thing happens on a much smaller scale too, personal, professional, business. And what you set in motion today could be shaping your life decades from now. About 5 years ago, I met someone through a mutual friend. Nothing to do with business, just a casual introduction. But a few months later, that person introduced me to someone else, and that one introduction became one of our largest and most significant client relationships at that time. It opened the door to international expansion, incredible learning opportunities, and I genuinely might not have been where I am now if not for that introduction. Just one introduction, one conversation, but years of compounding consequences and life-changing outcomes. And you know what I realized? The most valuable connections in my life were always unexpected. The most impactful events and opportunities came out of nowhere. Doesn't it feel like all these random events, introductions, connections in your life are just like little butterflies from 65 million years ago? Yes, they might be small, but maybe the next time we see one, let's still try not to step on it.